It was the kind of night that felt heavy, the sky pitch black over JFK Airport. Emily Bradford was late for her red-eye flight to Los Angeles, dragging her suitcase through the terminal, earbuds in, music blasting to drown out the usual airport chaos. She always flew for work, photography gigs, art shows, but tonight felt different. Her gut kept twisting. The flight had been delayed twice, and the airport lights reflected off the wet tarmac outside. Emily noticed a few odd things. A lone janitor pushing a mop bucket in a hurry, glancing nervously over his shoulder. A small group of passengers standing silently by the gate, whispering, faces pale in the fluorescent lighting. She shook her head, blaming jet lag and caffeine withdrawal. Finally, boarding was announced. She stepped onto the jet bridge, the metallic hum of the plane vibrating beneath her feet. The cabin was dimly lit, almost eerily quiet. Usually, red-eye flights are bustling with sleepy travelers, but tonight, only a handful of passengers were visible. She slid into her aisle seat by the window. Across from her, a middle-aged man with dark sunglasses and a leather jacket was staring straight ahead. Oddly, his reflection in the window seemed wrong. It didn't quite line up with his movements. Emily frowned. "Weird," she muttered under her breath. The flight attendants gave their usual safety speech, smiles plastered, voices too cheerful for the heavy silence in the cabin. Captain Reynolds' voice came over the intercom, smooth, calm, but with a strange echo. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking. Tonight's flight will be smooth, as always. Sit back, relax." The last words seemed to warp slightly, as if the plane itself was speaking through him. As the engines roared to life and the plane taxied, Emily couldn't shake the unease. She peeked out the window. The tarmac below was empty, unusually empty. Even the ground crew seemed absent. She rubbed her eyes and looked again. Nothing had changed. The plane lifted into the night sky. Halfway through the flight, the lights dimmed to sleep mode. Emily tried to rest, but her eyes kept flicking to the aisle. Something wasn't right. She noticed it first in the reflection of the overhead panel, shadows moving where no one was. The passenger across from her had shifted slightly, but his reflection remained frozen. Then the whispers started, soft, almost like static at first. She froze. They came from the intercom, but not the captain. The words were indistinct, fragmented. "Don't look. Out window." Emily's heart thudded. She glanced out her window. The stars outside seemed distorted, twisted like molten silver. Then a figure appeared, hovering alongside the plane. Not an aircraft, not a drone, just something dark, elongated, moving impossibly fast. Her phone vibrated in her pocket, a text from an unknown number. "You shouldn't be awake." She looked around. No one else was awake. The man across from her was still sitting, sunglasses on, expressionless. Even the flight attendants were static in the dim light, not moving. Her panic rising, she tried to call the captain over the intercom. No response. Then the oxygen masks dropped suddenly, but there was no turbulence, no warning lights, just masks dangling, swaying in the dim cabin light. Emily grabbed hers, pulling it over her face. Behind her, she heard faint scraping, like nails on metal coming from the cargo hold below. A shadow moved across the aisle. She could just barely see it in the dim red emergency lighting. Tall, impossible, faceless. She blinked. Gone. Her phone vibrated again. "Look out the window." Horrified, she slowly turned her head. Outside the small circular window, the figure was there again, closer this time. Its limbs stretched unnaturally, moving like a spider through liquid. It pressed against the glass, and for a second, Emily saw her own terrified reflection superimposed over its faceless head. Something clicked in her mind. The other passengers, where were they? She turned, scanning the rows behind her. Empty. Only her seat, the man in sunglasses, and shadows. The whispers grew louder. A voice, low and guttural, echoed in the cabin, yet no source was visible. "Why are you awake?" Emily stumbled back, hitting the seat in front of her. Her breathing ragged, she fumbled for the emergency exit, but the aisle seemed to extend infinitely, longer than the plane itself. Her vision blurred. Something slid under the seats, a dark mass moving like liquid shadow. She screamed, pressing herself against the wall, hoping anyone would notice, but the cabin remained silent, static, unnatural. Then came the comms, not the intercom, but the pilot's private frequency, static-filled. "Don't open door." The voice was familiar, Captain Reynolds, but warped, distorted, almost monstrous. Emily's hand shook as she reached for the window, just to peek again. The figure was gone. In its place, thousands of tiny lights, pulsating, swirling around the plane like a galaxy of miniature stars, but moving in unnatural patterns. They were not stars, something alive, something watching. The plane tilted slightly. No turbulence, but Emily felt weightless, not like flying, like falling. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. Then the plane's engines stopped, silence except for the whispers. Somewhere below, she thought she saw land, or maybe it was ocean, a void. She couldn't tell anymore. The lights outside pulsed faster, the whispers louder. The man in sunglasses finally turned his head. No eyes, just an endless black void where his face should have been. Emily screamed again. The cabin lights flickered, and then...
Emily's chest felt tight, her breaths shallow. The cabin lights flickered, shadows dancing across the seats like living things. She tried to scream again, but her voice was trapped, swallowed by some invisible pressure. Every instinct told her to move, but the aisle stretched endlessly before her. The plane had become wrong. She remembered the small emergency hatch by the rear. It might be her only way out. Crawling past the rows felt impossible. The shadows under the seats reached for her ankles like cold fingers. One grabbed her boot. Emily yanked it free, heart pounding, sweat running down her temples. She peeked into the overhead bins. Normally stuffed with blankets and safety cards, they were empty. But inside, faint whispers echoed, tiny, urgent voices she couldn't understand. Then the bins rattled violently. Something inside twisted and shifted. Emily jumped back. The faceless man across the aisle was gone. In his place, the air itself seemed to ripple. A low hum filled the cabin, vibrating in her chest. She turned toward the cockpit. The door was closed, but the faint red glow of warning lights spilled out. The hum grew louder, almost like a heartbeat. A sudden vibration shook the plane. Emily stumbled, sliding across the aisle. The lights outside the window warped, stars elongated into streaks of silver and black. She realized with horror that the plane was moving through something, not the sky she knew. It was liquid, dark, unending. Her phone buzzed again, another unknown number. It's too late to leave. She screamed, tossing it aside. But as she glanced back, the shadows had gathered. They weren't confined to the aisle anymore. They stretched up to the ceiling, pooling and swirling like smoke. Each shadow formed twisted silhouettes, vaguely human but impossibly distorted. Limbs bent the wrong way, heads tilted at unnatural angles. Emily ran for the rear exit. The hatch, normally heavy and metallic, swung open on its own. Darkness waited beyond. She hesitated. Her mind screamed, "Don't go!" But curiosity and terror forced her forward. She stepped into the void. The moment she did, the cabin behind her disappeared. Not vanished, but folded. Seats, walls, passengers, they were gone, replaced by an infinite darkness that hummed with whispers. The faceless figure reappeared, gliding toward her through the black liquid. Emily stumbled backward, falling into what felt like nothingness. Then gravity returned violently. She hit the floor of a strange metallic chamber. It looked vaguely like the plane's cargo hold, but stretched and distorted like looking through a warped lens. Inside, crates floated in the air, doors hanging open, contents spilling as if in zero gravity. The hum intensified. From one crate, a thin silver mist oozed out, forming shapes that mimicked Emily's worst memories. Familiar faces twisted into screams, her own reflection screaming silently. A voice crackled over a static-filled intercom. "You shouldn't be here. You weren't supposed to wake." Emily turned sharply. The pilot, Captain Reynolds, or what remained of him, stood in the center of the chamber. His face was half normal, half shadow, melting like candle wax. Emily backed away. Her foot hit a crate, spilling papers into the black air. Among them were safety manuals, boarding passes, and photographs of passengers. Hundreds of them, all with the same expression, frozen in terror, eyes black voids, mouth open in silent screams. Suddenly, a figure leapt from the shadows, not tall but thin and fast, moving with impossible speed. Emily dodged, barely avoiding a clawed hand. It collided with the faceless pilot, and for a second, both disappeared in a puff of smoke. Her phone buzzed again, no number this time, just one word: watch. Emily's gaze was drawn to a massive window at the far end of the chamber. Outside, she saw the plane, or what resembled it, but it was submerged in the black liquid sky, surrounded by hundreds of shadowy forms, each moving with purpose. The faceless figures in the cabin weren't just haunting the plane, they were herding it, dragging it through this impossible void. Panic surged. Emily ran for the window. When she pressed her hand against it, the glass rippled like water. On the other side, a swarm of faceless shadows pressed close, hundreds of them, all reaching for her, their whispers a deafening roar. "You woke. You shouldn't have." Her vision blurred. She tried to scream again, but nothing emerged. The chamber twisted. Ceilings became floors, walls stretched infinitely. Shadows collided with her in waves, knocking her down repeatedly. The whispers formed words she understood now, chanting in unison. Stay, stay, never leave. Emily crawled toward a faint light. The chamber's edge shimmered like the faint outline of the plane's exit hatch. She lunged for it, feeling cold hands clutch at her ankles. A massive shadow surged forward, tall, impossibly fast, limbs bending like broken metal. She screamed again, finally breaking through the hatch.
Emily staggered forward, her hands scraping across the cold metallic walls of the endless chamber. The whispers followed, no longer soft murmurs. They were screaming now, overlapping, a chorus of voices that twisted her thoughts. The faceless pilot, or whatever he had become, was nowhere in sight, but the shadows moved independently, creeping along the walls, slithering like liquid snakes. Emily's heartbeat echoed in her ears. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but the floor shifted beneath her feet, sometimes solid, sometimes like walking on a puddle of tar. Ahead, she spotted a faint light. It flickered in the distance, inviting her, taunting her. She moved toward it, legs trembling, sweat stinging her eyes. With every step, the whispers grew louder, now forming words in a voice eerily like her own. You can't leave. You belong here. The chamber seemed to pulse with life. Crates floated around her, some bursting open to release clouds of black smoke, shaping itself into grotesque familiar faces, her parents, friends, classmates. Each face twisted into silent screams, lips moving, but no sound emerging. Emily's stomach churned, and she stumbled back, her hand hitting a floating crate. A flurry of boarding passes and passenger manifests flew into the air like birds escaping a cage. Through the black haze, she saw a passage, a narrow corridor framed by flickering lights. It looked like the plane's cabin, but distorted. Seats were elongated, their upholstery stitched with dark, writhing threads that seemed almost alive. She could see shadows wriggling inside the fabric, like trapped insects. She forced herself to move, crawling through the corridor. The whispers followed, now sharper, more urgent. She could feel the shadows brushing against her arms, wrapping around her legs, but when she looked down, they were gone. Suddenly, the chamber lurched violently, throwing Emily to the floor. She rolled, narrowly avoiding colliding with a shadowy arm that lashed out from the ceiling. Above her, the faceless pilot reappeared, hovering unnaturally, limbs bending in impossible angles. His voice, distorted and mechanical, echoed in her mind.
"You weren't supposed to wake. You shouldn't have seen." Emily scrambled, eyes scanning for any exit. That's when she noticed the glimmer of something metallic in the far corner. It was a small door, unassuming, almost hidden in the shadows. Her hands shook as she approached it. A faint rhythmic tapping came from behind it, like someone knocking from the other side. Her hand trembled as she pushed the door open. The space beyond wasn't the plane, not the void, not the chamber. It was a narrow hallway, dimly lit, walls smeared with blackened fingerprints that seemed to move when she wasn't looking directly at them. At the end of the hall, a single emergency exit sign glowed, flickering weakly. Emily ran, the shadows surging behind her like tidal waves, whispering threats and promises. One shadow leapt from the wall, grazing her shoulder. She felt cold and weightless at the same time, like it had drained the warmth from her body. The door at the end of the hallway, her escape, loomed closer, but as she neared it, she realized it wasn't just a door. It was a frame, leading to something else, something alive, waiting for her. Outside the door, she could hear the plane again, or what sounded like it, the low hum of engines. The hum vibrated inside her skull. She pushed the door open. The world outside wasn't the plane cabin. It wasn't sky, air, or clouds. It was an endless expanse of black, stitched with faint, glowing cracks like veins of fire. The plane floated somewhere in the distance, smaller than it should have been, surrounded by the faceless swarm, moving in perfect, unnatural formation. Emily felt herself pulled toward the void. The whispers turned into screams. The shadows wrapped around her like chains, dragging her toward the black expanse. She clawed at the air, her nails scraping against something solid. Another crate? Or maybe a piece of the plane? She couldn't tell. Panic burned hotter than fear. She screamed with every ounce of strength left in her lungs. And then, silence. Emily opened her eyes. She was back in the cabin. Normal. The red-eye flight hummed quietly, passengers asleep, as if nothing had happened. The faceless pilot was gone. The shadows had vanished. But the whisper lingered in her mind. "You woke. We are still watching."
Emily jolted awake in her seat. For a few seconds, everything felt normal. The soft hum of the engines, the faint overhead lights, rows of passengers slumped asleep around her. Her heart was racing, soaked in sweat, but she told herself the same thing over and over. It was a nightmare, just a nightmare. She checked her phone. 3:17 a.m. Her screen flickered, then stabilized. No strange messages, no unknown numbers. She let out a shaky breath and leaned back, staring at the ceiling panels. The shadows were gone. The cabin looked ordinary. Too ordinary. Emily slowly turned her head toward the aisle. Every seat was occupied now. That hadn't been the case before. Passengers sat perfectly upright, seatbelts fastened, heads tilted forward as if asleep. But something was wrong. None of them were breathing. No rise or fall of chests, no shifting, no coughing, no snoring. Just stillness. The flight attendant passed by, pushing a drink cart. Her movements were smooth, rehearsed, too smooth. When she reached Emily, she smiled. "Coffee or water?" Emily hesitated. Are we landing soon?" The flight attendant paused, just for half a second. Then she smiled wider. "We're right on schedule." Emily noticed the name tag. It didn't have a name, just a blank strip of metal. Emily declined the drink. As the cart rolled away, she noticed something else. Every passenger's tray table was down. Every single one. And on every tray table sat the same thing. A boarding pass. Emily's name was printed on all of them.
She stood up too fast, bumping into the overhead bin. A few passengers' heads snapped up in unison. Eyes opened. Black. Endless. Reflecting nothing. They stared at her. A low murmur filled the cabin. Not voices, not quite. More like a vibration, a pressure that crawled under her skin. Emily backed into her seat. The man across the aisle, the one with the sunglasses, was back. Slowly, deliberately, he removed them. There was nothing underneath. No eyes, no face, just a smooth, dark surface that swallowed the light. "You weren't supposed to remember," he said. His mouth didn't move. Emily screamed. The cabin lights snapped off. Emergency lighting flooded the plane in deep red. Passengers began to move, not walking, not running, but sliding out of their seats, joints bending wrong, bodies stretching as if gravity had loosened its grip. The intercom crackled. Captain Reynolds' voice returned, but layered, doubled, dozens of voices speaking through him. "This flight does not land." Emily ran. The aisle no longer stretched, but it shifted, warping sideways, seats melting into the walls. Hands reached out from the upholstery, fingers tearing through fabric, grabbing at her clothes. She tripped. Cold hands seized her ankles. She kicked, screaming, crawling forward as the cabin dissolved around her. The window shattered silently, not breaking outward, but peeling open like eyelids. Outside wasn't sky. It was an endless field of darkness filled with other planes, hundreds of them, thousands, frozen mid-flight, suspended, wrapped in shadowy tendrils. Some were ancient, some modern, some half-consumed. Emily realized the truth with sickening clarity. These weren't hallucinations. They were flights that never landed, passengers who never arrived, people who woke up. A shadow loomed outside her window, larger than the plane itself. It moved slowly, deliberately, pressing closer. A voice filled her head, ancient and vast. "Sleep is mercy." Emily slammed her eyes shut. She whispered the only thing she could think of. "Wake me up." The pressure intensified. The whispers screamed. The cabin folded inward.
Emily felt herself falling. Not down, not forward, inward. Her body was still strapped into the seat, but her mind was being pulled somewhere else, somewhere vast, cold, and ancient. The screams of the passengers faded into a low, constant hum, like an engine that had been running for centuries. Then, silence. Emily opened her eyes. She was standing, not in the cabin, not in the void, but in an airport terminal. At first glance, it looked normal. Wide windows, departure boards, rows of empty seats. But there were no advertisements, no stores, no people, and no sound. The departure board flickered. Flight status, NYC to LAX. Delayed, delayed, delayed. Now boarding. Emily looked down. She was holding a boarding pass. Seat 17A, gate, dash. She turned slowly. Behind her was the gate. There was no jet bridge, just darkness. A voice spoke behind her. "You woke up." Emily spun around. Captain Reynolds stood there, whole this time, human, normal. His uniform was crisp, his face tired but calm. "You shouldn't be here," Emily said. He nodded. "None of you should." "What is this place?" "The moment between sleep and arrival," he said. "Most people never notice it." Emily's stomach dropped. "The passengers? The planes?" Captain Reynolds looked toward the empty terminal windows. Outside, floating in the black sky, were countless aircraft, frozen, suspended like insects in amber. "Some flights don't land," he said quietly. "Not because of crashes, because of awareness." Emily stared at him. "You're saying this happens when someone wakes up?" When too many wake up, he corrected. The lights flickered. From the darkness behind the gate, shadows began to move, slow, patient. "They're coming," Emily whispered. Captain Reynolds met her eyes. "They always do." "What do they want?" "To keep the system stable," he said. "Fear keeps people asleep. Sleep keeps the world moving." The terminal shook. The shadows spilled out now, tall, faceless shapes sliding across the floor, their whispers crawling into Emily's head. "Sit down. Fasten your seatbelt. Close your eyes." Emily backed away. "There has to be a way out." Captain Reynolds hesitated. "There is, but someone has to stay." Emily understood instantly. "No!" "You woke up," he said gently. "That makes you dangerous to them, but also valuable." The shadows surged closer. Emily clutched the boarding pass in her hand. "Wake me up," she whispered again. Captain Reynolds shook his head. "This isn't a dream." The shadows lunged. Emily ran. She sprinted past empty gates, past silent screens, past rows of seats filled with people who weren't there. The terminal stretched endlessly, until she saw it. A single door, marked Exit, Arrivals. Light poured through the cracks. She reached for it. Hands grabbed her shoulders. Cold, strong. She screamed. The shadows wrapped around her, pulling her back, voices screaming in unison. "Sleep is mercy." Emily fought with everything she had. She ripped the boarding pass in half. The terminal shattered. Emily woke up screaming. Lights, sound, people, real people. She was back on the plane. Flight attendants shouting, oxygen masks down, passengers panicking. The plane was descending. A voice over the intercom, clear, human. "This is your captain speaking. Prepare for landing." Emily sobbed. They landed in Los Angeles just before sunrise. No incident report, no explanation. The airline called it severe turbulence. Emily never flew again. Years later, she still wakes up at 3:17 a.m. Sometimes her phone lights up. No number, just one message. You arrived, others didn't. And when she looks out her window at night, she swears she can see planes in the sky that never move.